high school, I was just this average girl, not cool enough to hang with the popular crowd, but not quirky enough to get bullied either. Honestly, if you asked most of my classmates today, they probably wouldn't even remember me. I grew up in a big city. I won't say where, but think of places like Detroit, Chicago, or Philadelphia. I grew up in a place like that. My neighborhood was a mix of faded brick buildings and concrete jungles. There was always noise, honking horns, sirens, and stuff like that. It had its own kind of charm, but sometimes it felt a little heavy, and yeah, there was definitely a fair amount of crime. Like I said, I wasn't super popular. My claim to fame was that my dad owned a junkyard with an iron shredder. It might sound a bit odd, but honestly, it was kind of fascinating. A few people wanted to come by just to watch that machine shred old washing machines and rusty bikes into tiny pieces. The first time I saw it in action, I was about 10, and the noise was like thunder. I remember feeling scared watching how the metal twisted and crumbled. It was oddly beautiful in its destructive way. All the girls in school were crushing on this guy I'll call Marco, and of course I was too. He was a basketball star who worked out all the time. Plus, he always seemed super smart, like he had stocks figured out or something. Everyone knew he had some family problems, but he still radiated confidence. One night, during a football game, he came over to talk to me. My heart literally raced. I half expected someone to pinch me to wake me up from this dream. He didn't say much though. He just said he wanted to talk to me and asked where he could find me at halftime. I said we could meet at the front entrance. At halftime, we slipped away to his car. He said he wanted to go to McDonald's. That felt so random, but I wasn't going to complain. This was my first chance to hang out with Marco, and it was starting to feel like a date. While we were driving, he suddenly pulled over and asked if he could show me something. He took out a gun. My heart dropped into my stomach. I was not ready to see that. He said, "I need you to get rid of this." Everything around me went blurry. When someone holds a gun in front of you, all rational thought vanishes. I was terrified. I didn't want to be in that situation. I couldn't really say no because he was holding a gun. My mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. It felt like the weight of the world rested on my shoulders. I didn't ask questions. I just nodded, hoping to make things better. He told me to text him later saying it was nice seeing you at the game today after I got rid of it. We went through the McDonald's drive-thru, but I didn't have any appetite. That was seriously weird. I almost felt like I was being kidnapped. In a way, I kind of was. He didn't force me to get in the car with him, but I couldn't really tell him to let me go either. In a way, it felt like was intimidated into being in his car. Anyway, he gave me the gun and dropped me off at my car in a school parking lot. We said goodbye from there. I went home and grabbed the keys to the junkyard, praying my parents wouldn't catch me. Thankfully, they were upstairs. The keys were on the fridge. It felt like I was living in some sort of bad movie. I drove to the junkyard, but then panic set in hard. What if opening a gate was too loud and someone heard me? What if an alarm went off? What if someone showed up while I was there? What if the gun got stuck in the shredder? I'd never operated that thing alone. What if I accidentally hurt myself? What if I couldn't figure out how to operate the shredder in time? What if this whole plan backfired and made everything worse? I knew this wasn't going to work out, so instead I went back to McDonald's, ordered a large meal, because fries make everything better, and carefully slipped the gun into a bag with fries and a burger. I looked on Google Maps, found a park about 30 minutes away, and I drove there, trying to stay calm. When I got to the park, I felt strangely detached from everything around me. I tossed the McDonald's bag into a trash can. Then I sat on a bench with my heart racing while trying to think of what to say if someone asked what I was doing. If anyone had approached me that night and asked if I was okay, I would have just asked them to call an ambulance for me. I felt so guilty that I literally felt sick. I have no idea how long I spent trying to calm down, but eventually I was ready to go home. Later on, I found out Marco's sister had gotten mixed up in something truly horrific that night. She was involved in a violent robbery where she had used a gun to threaten a store owner. The store owner had not cooperated with her, and she had beaten the man's head with the gun, leaving him bloodied and dazed on the floor. Thankfully, no one was killed, but the brutality of it all felt terrifying and sad. That victim was an old man. I was caught up in something way darker than I'd ever imagined. When Marco's sister was arrested and charged, I was terrified someone would find out what I had done and link it back to me. I felt like I was carrying around this heavy secret and I was suffocating. The thought of being questioned by the police, or worse, becoming a suspect haunted me. I never brought up the incident. I saw Marco around school and made sure not to even make eye contact. Thankfully, I never heard anything more about it. The rumours faded and life went on. When girls talked about Marco, I said just enough to pretend like everything was normal. I still visit home occasionally and have seen Marco around. He's always surrounded by friends, laughing and carefree, but we never talk. It is terrifying how easily I was intimidated into participating in something so horrific. Each time I see him, it leaves me with a chill. Title: Attempted Ambush at Night. This happened 4 years back. It was the middle of winter, and the night was unseasonably warm without a hint of snow off the ground. I left my apartment around 8 p.m. to go for my daily walk. I worked nights and my schedule was screwed up, hence the 8 p.m. walk, figuring I would cross the bridge into the city nearby. For further context, I'm a tall guy who's fairly athletic, and I was in my late 20s at the time. I'd rarely had a problem walking at night, and at the time I felt safe to do so. I put on my headphones and headed towards the bridge. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by old houses, a subpar Mexican restaurant, a really good Mexican restaurant, a sketchy gas station, some newly built upscale apartments, and finally I was at the river, enjoying the view of the bright lights over the dark flowing water, not yet frozen. I crossed the bridge into the city and hit a crosswalk button at a four-way intersection, then noticed someone standing on the corner opposite, the only other soul I'd seen outside that night. Seemingly she was doing nothing, and I assumed she was waiting for an Uber to come pick her up, since she didn't seem to be waiting for the light to change. The street, ordinarily busy during the daytime, was silent. The light changed, and I crossed, headed in her direction. As I neared her, I noticed that she would cast glances in my direction, then look away almost sheepishly. She did this multiple times, and I figured she was unnerved by me. I sympathized, figuring it must have made her uneasy, us being the only two people on a dimly lit street. As I passed by, I took in her outfit, mostly because I thought she looked cold. She wore a knitted hat with tassels, a sweater that looked too thin for winter, tight jeans, and a little plastic children's backpack on her back. I thought she was in her teens at first, but upon closer inspection, she appeared to be in her late 20s or 30s. She had short cropped light brown hair and a pale complexion. She was skinny and was of average height. I was maybe a head taller than her. I walked by and continued down the street. I passed by high-rise hotels on my right and left, and made my way into a central park. During peak hours, this place would be packed with tourists and locals alike, but that day, at an odd hour, and with the pandemic in full swing, I felt like the only man in the city. I admired the brilliant display of lighted trees as I crossed through the centre of the park. Then, figuring I was at a good halfway point in my journey, I made my way around an old marble and stone library back towards the bridge. As I turned the corner of the library back onto the street from which I'd come, I nearly collided with someone moving towards me. It was the same woman I'd seen not 10 minutes earlier. My noise-cancelling headphones were still on, so I pulled down one side and said something by way of apology. She said nothing in return. Instead, she stepped back from me and stood below a streetlight, not making eye contact. She stole tiny glances at me, that same tick I had noticed before. I put my headphones back on, nodded a good night, and headed towards the nearest crosswalk. Reason told me that she must be headed in the direction I'd come from, since we'd nearly run into each other, headed opposite ways. But some part of me whispered that she wasn't headed that way. Sure enough, when I turned to look, she was trailing close behind me, her strides surprisingly long and energetic. I found this odd enough that I continued to watch by and stopped. A car went past, and as it did so, she squatted over a plastic bag a few meters from me, rifling frantically for something, looking up at me on occasion. I hit a button on my headphones, stopping my podcast so that I could hear her better. What I found disturbing about the motion of her looking for her bag is that it struck me as fake, as though she were pretending for some reason. She was barely looking inside, and her careless motions struck more like bad acting. Something about her motions, the way she kept looking at me, felt wrong. The light changed, and I began to walk quickly, but she was faster. She stood suddenly, darting past me towards the museum, swinging the half-open little pink backpack over her shoulder. I watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights. I hoped that was the end of that, and after a few beats of not seeing her, I let my guard fall a little, restarting my podcast. Beyond the museum was a patch of poorly lit sidewalk in front of a squat building with mirror-like windows. I wasn't far from the bridge now. As I made my way back there, I turned my head to look at the reflections of buildings and streetlights in the windows. To my horror, a dark figure sprinted silently towards my reflection, dreamlike. I'm not sure why, maybe out of sheer confusion, but I turned to meet her as she hurtled towards me. Perhaps surprised by my sudden turn, she halted mere feet from me, staring. Her eyes were wide and looked frantic, wild. She kept looking at my arms, then back at my face, as though sizing me up. My accidental bluff had worked, and in the darkness, I suppose I must have looked more prepared to fight back than I had felt. She gripped something small tightly in one hand, though she held it off to the side, and in the shadow of the building I couldn't see what it was. Seconds dragged as we stood there, staring at one another. Immobilized by fear and confusion, I waited for her to make some move, to attempt to use whatever object she held in her hand. Just then, to my enormous relief, a car trundled slowly past. A bit of my strength returned, and over my blaring podcast, I felt more than heard myself shouting to her, "What do you want?" No reply. I slowly backed away from her, expecting her to move. She just watched me, that same intense look on her face. I took another step back, then another, steadily backing away from her until I felt confident enough to turn and carefully walk away. As I reached a better lit area, I began to move faster, all the while keeping my eyes trained on her shadowy form. She stood there for some time, statuesque. Then, abruptly, having spontaneously abandoned whatever plan she may have had for me, she turned from me, and without looking for traffic, she crossed the street with long strides and disappeared around the corner of a building. Something about the casual air of it disturbed me. I kept my eyes trained behind me on my walk home, afraid that she would follow me. The bridge was well lit, and I saw no sign of her. Knowing that this was the only way for her to follow me and keep up on foot, I breathed a sigh of relief. I saw no more cars head from the city, no more pedestrians out walking. Nothing happened after that. I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops that night. I still regret having not called, despite my roommates insisting I do so. I just remembering thinking that must have been in shock, in denial at having been nearly ambushed, especially by someone smaller than me, in my own city, so close to my apartment. One of my roommates called the cops for me. A cop drove through the area, but by that point, she was gone. Woman with the little pink backpack. Let's not meet again. Title: I had a stalker once when I was in community college. This happened 6 to 7 years ago now. I played soccer for 1 year in community college after high school. I knew this guy because he worked for the athletics department. He was another student. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a 1 hour gap between classes. This guy noticed me in the library, asked what I was doing there. I told him I had an hour-long gap, and he started coming regularly to hang out. I didn't mind because he seemed like a normal guy. He wasn't waiting for anything, but he just wanted to hang out. He brought me little gifts a few times, like chocolates and stuff. He was being a little too sweet for someone I barely knew. I didn't think about red flags. With the gifts, I remember he always downplayed it. He'd be like, "They had extra Kit Kat bars today in the office. Do you want some?" He never said that he purposely bought Kit Kat for me. I know a lot more about boys now than I knew back then. I think he knew that buying gifts would be too much, but he still wanted to do it without doing it. The soccer season for us ended before Thanksgiving. The only teams that kept playing after that were going to the playoffs, not us. After Thanksgiving, we had finals. In that brief period after the soccer season and before Thanksgiving, he asked me about my classes for second semester. To be honest, I hadn't been super organised with course registration, and I honestly didn't know. Also, the counsellors were completely clueless. I didn't tell him that, but I remember saying I didn't want to have another gap hour like this because it wasted so much time. I don't think he was happy to hear that. He also asked if I would play another season, and I said no to that. I needed to manage my time better, and playing soccer every day was not helping. I think my mistake was that I just said too much and unfiltered. I used to do that a lot back then, saying too much without thinking about how it can affect other people's feelings. That was on the last Thursday before Thanksgiving, so no more hour gaps to hang out anymore. We had Thanksgiving break, we took finals, and we had winter break. Everything was great. Winter break was when the real problems started. In the mornings, this guy literally showed up outside my house while sitting in his car. The first time, I didn't believe it was actually him. The second time, I checked and it was. By then, it was really clear that we both knew what was going on. He was stalking me. And that wasn't all. I posted on my Instagram story sometimes about places I was. This guy literally showed up there several times, like girly stores at the mall where he had zero business being. He did lots of things like that. He also started pointing his phone at me like he was taking pictures. That was even weirder. I basically stopped using social media over this. After winter break, this continued. When my parents were at work, this guy came during the afternoon too. I called the cops a few times. They went and tried to talk to him. He basically told them he wasn't going to talk, and that was it. I think the cops wanted to help, but they could never do anything about it because he was careful not to break the law. trespass, he didn't make threats, he didn't show weapons, etc. I have no idea what he is doing now. My guess is that he gave up. Maybe his little obsession kind of became old, and he found other things to pay more attention to. At least, I hope so. But if he still comes by, I have no idea. I think the most challenging thing is that I couldn't tell my parents, since I knew